Really, I think the breaking point for first responders is unique to the person. It's really hard to define exactly what that's going to be, as because for each person it's going to be slightly different. But what we're really looking at, I guess, to give an example, is to really kind of go through what I went through, and then that'll give you a better idea as to what is going to cause that for others. And really what happened to me was several years in, and to understand, I'm a former police officer, and several years in, I remember literally laying up in bed and staring at the ceiling, and we had a water stain in the ceiling that, it's 22 years later, and I can still draw it in my head as to what it was like, and it would alternate between looking up at the ceiling and looking over at my alarm clock and seeing those red numbers in the dark just slowly tick by. And I'd stare up at the ceiling. I remember this one day going, man, they were completely right. And what I mean by that was, when I started policing, I was told three things. One, first of all, was get out. Right after I started my first week as a police officer, I had another officer walk up to me and go, get out while you can. And I thought that was crazy, because I really wanted to, I was there, I was gung-ho, I was going to make a difference, and I couldn't believe there was somebody else in that career that I wanted so desperately that was now telling me already to quit. And the second thing was, the guy said to me, he goes, how well do you sleep? And I said, well, I sleep really well. And this guy said, well, you can forget about that. That's going to end. And there I was in the middle of the night, just not sleeping. It was going to be another night of no sleep at all. And I was having to go into work, just exhausted, and having to help other people at that same time. And the third thing was something that my dad said to me. And he said, pick two people that you really see that have it together, and mimic and model your career after what they're doing. And well, the one that I picked, he ended up going on and ended up becoming the chief of police where we were. And the other guy, within my first year, he ended up taking his own life down in our locker room. And he had the career I wanted, that I thought I wanted. And here he was a year later. He took his life with his own gun. And I just remember at that point, I just had a horrible complaint that I'd been to, and I ended up getting back into my cruiser after I left that complaint, and I just broke down bawling. It was uncontrollable, and I couldn't just deal with it. And lo and behold, my supervisor calls me and he goes, hey, can you pull over? I need to talk to you. And so here I am. I was 6'5", I was 225. We're all these tough as nails guys type thing who don't, nothing affects them. And I've got to pull up with my supervisor, and tears are just uncontrollably streaming down my face. And, I was just, at that point, as I refer to it, I was broken. I hit that breaking point, and I knew that, I had to get out, because at that point I felt so useless to myself, to my family. My wife hated me, my kids hated me, even my dog didn't like me. Like, it sounds like such an exaggeration, but it was true. And you're literally at that point of going, I want to take my own life. And at that point I realized that my family was not going to be better off if I was gone. My family were going to be way worse off. And that's when I just made that decision. I've got to do something else. I didn't even know what I was going to do at that point. It was just, I need to do something else. And that, I guess, to answer your question, sorry that was such a long answer, but really, that's kind of the breaking point that so many first responders get to, and they feel like they've failed, and to admit to this, what's really, right across the border around the world is you can't admit to that emotion that you're feeling. You can't admit that you need help, and it's perceived as a weakness. And what I really try to explain to people is what you think people are perceiving as weakness is one of the strongest things that you can do, because it is so much harder to go in front of your peers, regardless of industry, and say, I need help. It takes so much more strength to do that than to hide what you are thinking is a weakness. And it's better to understand that there's so many more people that you are around that are going through the same things that you are.
I remember working with some first responders many years ago, and the first day on the job as a police officer, there was an autopsy to be done. And she had to go to the autopsy. The person who was doing the autopsy was smoking cigarettes, so she walked into the room. The first smell was the cigarettes. And then the second thing was, catch this. And they threw one of the body organs to her, and she had to catch it. And so that was the very first day on the job. And then from there, it just started to stack on top of that, event after event after event. And every time she asked for help, the response was, compartmentalise it. Just put it over there and get on with the day and just deal with it later. And after compartmentalising for 10 or 20 years, it started to build up. And the signs and symptoms weren't so much the mental and emotional torment anymore, because that could be repressed. She was totally numb. It was the eating. It was the drinking. It was the irrational thoughts, exactly what you were mentioning here. But in that field, asking for help was looked at as a weakness. And I think everybody, and as you say it here, they know that asking for help is actually a sign of strength, but it depends heavily on that environment. I've heard other first responders working in highway patrol, and one of the turning points for this man in highway patrol was he showed up and there was a blue car with a family of 4 that got hit by a white truck, and they were all killed. He said the next Friday night there was a same model blue car with a family of 4 who got hit by an identical looking white truck. And he said on the third Friday of the month, another blue car with a family of 4 got hit by a white truck. And he felt like he was on Groundhog Day. Every Friday night, the same thing happened over and over and again. But on the third one, the really interesting thing for him was he was pulling the body out of the vehicle and he could hear a baby crying. And he thought, is my mind playing tricks on me? I can hear a baby crying. This is not how it works. The first one didn't look like this, the second one. And then when he pulled one of the bodies out of the car, the mother had been holding the child. And so he thought he was hearing things, but it was an actual baby who had survived the accident. And that was the turning point for him. He's like, I just cannot do this anymore for the mental and the emotional impact that it had on him. And that was his breaking point. And I'm sure people who have been in your position before have seen this stuff on repeat over and over and again for 10 and 20 years.
Oh, completely. And you're right about the compartmentalizing, because that's what we did, right? That's what they do. And, it gets to the point, though, that you've got that overstuffed closet, right, that's expanding and expanding, and then all of a sudden it doesn't, it's literally the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, and then everything just comes tumbling out all at once. So sometimes it doesn't even have to be a major traumatic event that caused it, but it's the buildup of everything that happened up to that point. And, it could really even be some of the prior trauma in our life that we brought in that is outside of what happened. Like if you've got that, if if you were a kid and you were in that blue car that got hit by a white truck, you know, and then all of a sudden 20 years later you're the officer at that scene, whether you're an EMT or fire or whatever, and you're having to extricate somebody that it could hit you the exact same way, and it's got nothing to do with what you've got built up. And so it's very difficult to really try and determine that breaking point. All I know is that there are so many first responders out there that are indeed suffering from it, and they don't know where they need to turn.
A lot of the first responders, they know that they've got to get out of the job. And I think the advice there, the first day on the job for you was get out whilst you can. But after 10 or 20 years of working, there's so many responsibilities. Okay, I've got a mortgage. I just can't stop working, and I need to be able to replace my income. And I think the reality for most of the world is that most people live paycheck to paycheck. So the thought of leaving a secure job for insecurity just logically doesn't make sense. Financially, the dots can't be connected, and that's a factor. After 10 or 20 years, although you've got a lot of life experience and unique knowledge and skills to one particular job, they don't always transfer over to a new job. There can be people who have been great employees but struggle as an employer. Those factors. We've also got the learning curve. In a lot of businesses, if you start a business, any business, it really takes 7 years to become profitable. If we look at all the studies around the world, it's around about the 7th year that the business really starts to turn a profit. But you can't really consider starting a business if you're living paycheck to paycheck, because you know that you're going to lose everything. So
I agree completely. Yeah.
For these first responders who are at that breaking point and they know that the environment is a major problem, and it's like that, like the police, it's the environment. The environment is the environment, and it doesn't matter how positive or optimistic you are. It doesn't matter how many affirmations you say. The environment is the environment, and we have no control over it. Yes, we can control our responses, but the environment remains the same, and it's going to trigger you off no matter what happens because of that. For these first responders, what do they need to have in place to move away from being employed to becoming a business owner? What do they need?
Well, the first thing that one of the first things I like to do with them is something that we call the who are you, right? And because so many of them think, well, I'm a first responder, and so I have to find something in the first responder industry. And unless they remove themselves from that environment, they're always going to run into that same problem. They're always going to have those same triggers, like you said. So we run them through the who are you, because by doing that, they, like myself, I'm a brother, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm not just, now a former police officer. There's so many more things, and we suddenly start to realize, wow, that who are you makes me go, that's such a small part of my life. And then we can take that who are you and try and narrow down what niche or niche, depending upon where in the world you're listening for the pronunciation, where we might be able to look at something. And the next part we need to do is we need to get them to change their money mindset, right? Because they look at this, at their salary as something that's insurmountable, right? I don't think I'm going to be able to replace that. Well, as long as you keep thinking you're not going to be able to replace that, you're not going to. Whereas in reality, and what I realized is just a number, right? And we've got to get them beyond that fear that they can't and make them realize that they can, because so many other people out there have done it, okay? And one of the things that I bring to the table when I'm talking with them is the fact of, okay, you know what? I figured out a whole bunch of ways to do it wrong, right? Because I didn't have a mentor. When I walked out of this, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know anybody who was in the position I was in. I had nobody to help guide me through all the pitfalls that I fell into, right? So, you want to be able to have a mentor. And the other thing you need to do is you need to have a plan. Like, what exactly are we going to do? How much sick time do you have booked up? How much holiday time do you have booked up? Where are you with your finances? What do you have for your, how much do you have socked away? Do you have a self-directed pension? Is it, when can you get to that? There's so many different things that we need to go through, but you need to have a plan and you need to have a belief that you're going to be able to do it. And then we can help get you to where and what you're going to be doing.
Planning. I think a lot of people operate from hope, but not many people operate with a plan. And when you've got a plan that's realistic and it's got good time frames on it, that gives you a lot of confidence to act. And I know when I've had mentors, and I've had them for many years, they're big on the plan. Okay, what are you going to do first? What are you going to do second? And when that doesn't work, what are you going to do instead? And that's given me a lot of confidence over the years. From your experience with mentors, you've got a great mentor by the name of Grant Cardone. Having a mentor like that in your life, what's the difference that it's made to you?
It's been tremendous, and Grant is such a great mentor because Grant has been in the trenches, and he's done it, and he's done it to such a great degree of being a multi-billionaire himself, and to be able to go in and say, okay. He's got this thing called Cardone University, where literally over his entire career, he's recorded training videos, and there's a couple decades worth of training videos there, and so you can go in and you can find a topic on anything, and and learn from it. And the other thing that's so great is him, his staff, all of the teams that I'm a part of. It's real time access, right? And it's been so helpful. And one of the greatest things that they said was, they said, I don't care what industry you're in, right? They're like, it doesn't matter. As much as you think your industry is unique, it's not. So here are the things that you need to learn in order to be able to start, grow, and scale a substantial, successful business. And knowing that and having that confidence, and it just was such a huge difference for me. Even after 2 decades of myself before I found him, it's so huge. And I find it amazing that even when you're talking with people that do run businesses, so many don't have a plan, right? They have no plan, and they're already been running this thing for years. And I say to them, I go, well, how do you know where you're going if you don't have a plan to get there? So it's so important to have that plan. And, when Grant talks, Grant has his own mentors. So when you look at that, you've got this multi-billionaire who's going, I'm still learning. I've got people who are coaching me. Well, why aren't other people who are wanting to start businesses, why do they try and go it on their own, right? Find someone who's willing to guide you, who's done it, and let them help you get to where you need to get to. And that's where I really decided first responders was where my heart was. I've worked with a lot of other businesses and everything, but I finally just said, I want to get back to where my heart is, because I know where I was at, and I know these people are stuck, and I want to help them the way that Grant's helped me.
first responders do have a tough time. When I was in aviation, I was in the Middle East, and we had a team called Critical Incident Stress Management, and we also had peer support. And whenever there was an aircraft disaster, we were called in. And it was amazing that when the peer support team were called in to debrief the crew, the return to work ratio was about 99 to 100. For every 100 people you spoke to, 99 returned to work immediately, and they had taken away a positive experience. Although it was traumatic, they left with a positive learning, and they were able to return to work, and they didn't have any sick days. And they also didn't have any ongoing mental or emotional health challenges. For the one person who didn't go back to work, it was always a genuine reason. And I remember I had a first responder who had been doing CPR for 6 hours continuously. And he said to me, Daniel, we couldn't get the doctor. There was no doctors on the aircraft that day. We couldn't get through to the medical team. And all I could do was to do CPR with our team non-stop. And he said he was on the job doing that for 6 hours and he was absolutely exhausted. He said, would you give me a day off work because I'm just physically exhausted? I'm like, we'll take care of that, no problem. But he wanted to go back to work because he was able to talk through that and get support, and he didn't have to compartmentalise it or feel like he was alone. And we used to see a lot of that. You've been helping a lot of people, and your clients have made more than $100 million US in the past few years. In terms of systems, what systems did you have in place with your clients to prevent failure?
Well, the biggest one, first of all, is accountability, right? Like they need to understand, first of all, that they're accountable for their own actions, right? And what's helpful for them is that they're accountable to somebody else as well, that somebody is going to be following up to make sure that those steps that they know they need to do are actually being done, right? And I think more than anything else, that was that's the biggest one, right? And but that's not always what happens, right? I've worked with some people who are, literally, I'll get to that tomorrow, right? And I'll get to that tomorrow. And all of a sudden I have the next business meeting with them and they're like, oh, right, yeah, And at a certain point, it's just, if you're not going to help yourself, it doesn't matter what systems I've got in place. If you're not going to take those necessary steps and do it. And the second part is I try and explain to people that you need to take action towards where you're wanting to get to. And action has got to be something that's, relevant, that's going to help you actually get to your goal. Sitting down for a straight month and making notes is great, maybe if you're writing a book, but if you're trying to sell smoothies, making notes for a month is not going to help you get to where you need to get to. You need to go out and you need to start selling smoothies to people, right? And so it's, making sure that they're doing the things that they need to do, taking actual, action that's going to help them grow their business. And then from my end, following up with them to make sure that they're actually doing those things that they need to do. One of the great things that I have kind of in my back pocket as a Cardone coach is the fact that we put everybody onto Cardone University, right? So not only can we say, here's what you need to do, but then there's videos that they have to go in, that they have to watch. Sometimes there's related worksheets with all of it. And then we can also go in and we can see whether or not they've actually gone in and done all of that stuff, so that we can then, for the ones that might be lagging, we can give them a poke and go, hey, you need to get on top of that, right? But there's that extra level of accountability. From my end, I also need to be taking good notes, right? And, making sure that I'm, following what they are doing so that when I meet with them the next time, I'm having relevant conversations with them about it. Instead of it just being, okay, this is dude 5 today, right? I'm meeting with Daniel right now, right? And so I know about Daniel and his kids and his business, and he's in construction, and, because then that allows me to ask relevant questions, right? And then the final thing that needs to be done is I need to listen, right? Because it's the old adage of give them a fish versus teaching them to fish, right? And just by telling them all the time, it doesn't necessarily do it, as opposed to working with them to get them to be able to solve that problem, right? And let's work all the way together with their plan, because we know if we got this ultimate goal over here, but yet we're working all the way through here to get there, we know from all the repeated successes that I've seen and I've been a part of and everything, we're going to get there, right? So let's keep the end in mind, but let's work on every single one of those pieces that we know are going to get you there if we do it.
Many years ago, I worked with a lot of people who were in the military. And when they left the military, they started their own businesses. And the majority of them failed. And they failed really fast. And one of the things that they never had in place was somebody to hold them accountable. And they said, Daniel, it's interesting. Coming out of the military, everybody thinks we're disciplined. You're disciplined, you're disciplined. And they said, we're not disciplined. We just had a sergeant major who held us accountable for everything. And we had to report back to the sergeant major every single day. Now that we're out of the military and we're doing it for ourselves, we don't have anybody to report to. So when we get lazy, there's nobody to hold us accountable. When we sleep in, there's nobody to hold us to accountable. When we spend a whole month taking notes and not selling smoothies, nobody holds us accountable. And that accountability piece caused so many good people to fail. What made them successful was the accountability in the military. Get into the real world, get into the business, and you're a civilian, nobody's going to hold you accountable. And we can't expect our family to do it. They've got to do other things. We can't expect our friends to do it. They got their lives to live. We need a professional in place to say, this is what you said you'd do. This is what you've done. This is what you failed to do. Let's redo the plans to ensure that you don't fail. Because all of us can be optimistic and assume success. But the reality is, without those elements in place, we're going to fail.
Oh, completely. And one of the favorite questions that I like to ask myself, even is, would I fire myself right now? Right? Like, if I'm my own employee, am I taking the steps that I'm supposed to be doing that my boss would be grateful and happy that I'm doing? Or am I just lucky that I'm the owner? Right? Because, would I fire myself some days? Yes. There's no doubt, when you know that you had to get up at 7 and you got up at 9, well, in a lot of businesses, you're suddenly unemployed if you've done that, and so you need to look at yourself and go, you have to be your own best employee, right? And you have to, you have to be accountable, but it's so important to find that person who is going to ultimately hold you accountable to your actions, so that you have that extra person, like you said, that sergeant major that you have to report back to, right? Exactly, and to be able to go, okay, and then what's next, right? Because sometimes with families, we get so wrapped up in the minutia of our day-to-day that we will lose track and we'll get off course, and we need that person that's going to pull us back so that we can get there. And having that person is, I've lost track of the amount of money that I've spent with Grant Like, honestly, I have. But I also know that it's been more than a tenfold, easily more than a tenfold return from everything that I've spent with them. And if I shut that off today, even though I weren't, I also get to carry that with me for the rest of my life. So that's going to turn out to be 100-fold and 1,000-fold by the time that I'm done. And a lot of people look and they go, oh, well, it's going to cost me to have a mentor. Well, no, it's going to cost you to not have a mentor. Way more money to not. And you need to. Why do the greatest athletes in the world have coaches? You know, why does LeBron have different coaches for different aspects of his life? Well, why does Brady? Why did Brady? Why do all these different people have this? Why does Grant Cardone have a mentor? Well, it's not why